Shabbat Shalom. I wish to share a story that admittedly will not paint me in the most positive of light, although it does come from when I was a freshman in high school, so please be forgiving of my 14-year-old self. I was taking a Spanish class, and we had an exam day, and I felt well prepared. I sat down, started answering all of the questions with confidence, and the student who was sitting next to me, I noticed, began to kind of peek a little bit at my paper. And I knew this person not well, but I knew this person to be a busy individual, and so I assumed maybe they didn't have time to prepare for this test properly. They seem like they're struggling. And so as this person peeked over to my paper, I slid my paper a little bit farther on my desk so that this person could read over my shoulder. It was, as I came to learn, not a good decision. Of course, our Spanish teacher caught this act of academic dishonesty and proceeded to give each of us an F, a 0 on the test, at which I felt at the time was unfair. I said, well, I wasn't the one who was doing the cheating, but it was explained to me that although my motivation was to help this person, I in fact actually was not helping him by my actions. I was just encouraging academic dishonesty. I was encouraging cheating, and I was encouraging another person to skate through without having to prepare and study and learn the material. And ever since then, I've tried to be hyper aware of where the gap sometimes lies between our motivations and our actions. A lesson that we can take from this week's Torah portion about motivation and action and the gap therein that lies between them. We pick up in this week's portion, Parashat Pinchas, right where we left off last week at the end of Balak. At the end of Parashat Balak, we learned that the Israelites began to cohabitate with Moabites and Midianites in the surrounding area. Part of the big issue with this was that they therefore were enticed to worship these foreign gods. And so it proved to be a big problem. And a plague broke out amongst the people coming from God's anger. And Pinchas at the very end, who is one of the priests of the Israelite people, he follows Zimri and Cosbi, a Midianite woman and an Israelite man, as they engage in intimate acts, which would have been prohibited at the time between these two peoples. And in the process, he violently stabs them right through the belly as they're in the act, killing both of them. And lo and behold, we learn in the very beginning of this week's Torah portion that God seems to see this as favorable at first, right? Saying that Pinchas has turned back God's wrath, and therefore the plague goes away. And it seems that Pinchas is even rewarded in a way because he's reassured that his line will continue in the priesthood, and he's offered by God what is called a Brit Shalom, which our Chumash translates as pact of friendship. More accurately, it's really a brit, a covenant of shalom, of peace, a covenant of peace. And it's quite questionable. Throughout our tradition, there have been those in the classical texts and settings up to modern times who have justified Pinchas's actions to some degree. There are those who have condemned it harshly, right? Even in the Talmud, there's a statement in which we envision a scene in which Pinchas asks the Sanhedrin, the court at the time, if it was permissible for him to kill Cosbi and Zimri as he did. And at the time, they say the law may permit it, but we do not. Right? That's to say that it was available to him according to the letter of the law to do away with what would have been deemed criminal behavior, but real people judging the case would have said this is not permitted, right? And I think that we are offered an opportunity to read a little bit between the lines when we try to understand God's response to Pinchas, right? God offers Pinchas a Brit Shalom, a covenant of peace, following an incredibly violent act. I think what God seems to be hinting is what you did ultimately led to an important result, but perhaps that may not have been the way you needed to handle this, right? The covenant of peace, right? It binds us up in peaceful manners. That's to say, I appreciate what you did, but here's a hint that next time look for a more peaceful route. And one of the things that we note that may be rewarded in this is the motivation that Pinchas had, not necessarily his action. Right? He was motivated for good. He was motivated to try to get our people to avoid worshiping foreign idols. Right? Idol worship is one of the biggest no-nos that exists in our tradition. Right? That we're supposed to focus our attention on Hashem, on the one God, and not on these foreign idols as a detractor from true holiness and true connection and true depth of relationship with God. So perhaps what we understand is that Pinchas is being rewarded for his motivation, but his action may have missed the mark, right? To say the least. It forces us to examine how we behave when we consider being motivated for good. I believe deep down that almost every person in everything they do is ultimately motivated for good, right? Is ultimately motivated with good intentions. As the saying goes, the road of good intentions is paved, right? Or the path is paved with good intentions. It's important for us to realize that we can't just rely on the fact that I was motivated for good in the way that I acted, or I was motivated to be helpful in the way I responded. We have to be very careful about the action that then follows that motivation, right? Perhaps when I think back to my Spanish test experience, perhaps although I was motivated to help this person, the action should have been maybe a little bit harsher, which is to say, I can't slide my paper over. I can't let you copy off of me, because although that helps you in this moment, in the long run, that's probably not a good thing, right? It's probably not okay. And so it's my blessing for all of us that as we take note of what motivates us to do good, what motivates us to help in the world, what motivates us to move justice forward, what motivates us to treat each other kindly in our relationships, to provide help for those who are in need. As we examine those motivations, I offer a blessing that we have the forethought and the moment to pause and think, does the action I'm about to take based on this motivation also go toward good? Is it also helpful? Is it actually responding to the need in this moment? Or is it just responding to my desire, my motivation to do good, and therefore I'm acting on impulse? I hope that we're able to still be able to offer great guidance, great help, love and kindness for those who need it as we're motivated to do so. Shabbat Shalom.